In Fusion World's first set release, Yellow Ginyu positions itself as the premier OTK deck, but it does come with some very specific counters that hopefully we can kind of build around. With that said, here's my deck list. If you're just here for the specific list, here it is, but I do think there are some specific points in regards to the way I built my Ginyu deck that are worth going card for card, so you're going to want to stick around. No matter the specific build, Swarm is the name of the game for any Ginyu deck, and this has been true for as long as time goes, even all the way back in Masters. And in Fusion World, that lines itself up in an OTK style deck specifically because of the power of the leader. On the front side, we have a mostly typical draw leader, except he has the caveat that on Awaken, you actually restand an energy, which is kind of nice because it allows you to extend into your turns. And then on the Awaken side is where all the juice really is. So on swing, draw a card, but then has an activate main once per turn for the cost of 3 and discarding 2 cards. So this is a really expensive ability, but you get to choose all your battle cards with Ginyu Force in their special traits and switch them to active mode. When you consider the fact that just about every Ginyu card is essentially a 20k as well, it means that you are probably pulling so much power out of your opponent's hand and hopefully being able to close them out. It's an ability that is incredibly powerful, but balanced by the sake that essentially every card in the archetype is effectively a 20k, so there are ways to kind of fight around it. But no matter what, your Ginyu deck is going to have loads of Ginyus, and this is where we run these. Off rip, the only one that we don't have yet here is Birder. There's room for Birder, is a 2-drop 20k, kind of lines up with the rest of the strategy. You do want a certain density of them, but unfortunately I kind of value the flexibility, especially since deck space is tight when you consider for the text we're making, which we're going to see in just a minute. But without Birder, we are running a core 6 different Ginyus across multiple numbers. All of them I think are at 4, besides Guldo, which is a little bit more techy, but honestly you could up Guldo and I wouldn't really fault you for it. To kick off our non-Ginyus, we have Jice, a 1-drop 15k that has a permanent on your turn. If you have a total of 3 or more cards with Ginyu Force across your leader and battle cards, it gets an additional 5k, so 1-drop 20k, can't complain there. Then we have Guldo, a 2-drop 5k, so really vulnerable, but has an activate main. Switch this card to rest mode, choose up to one of your opponent's rest mode battle cards and it can't switch to active mode during your opponent's turn. We're an aggressive deck. We don't want to be spending too much time and too many resources trying to deal with our opponent's boss monsters or with blockers or anything like that. So getting them out of the way for a turn is kind of how Yellow gets around dealing with those cards, which it can't typically deal with. Then finally, we have Raccoon, a 3-drop 20k. On play, add up to 1 card from your life to your hand, then play up to 1 battle card would cost 2 or less, and Ginyu Force and its special traits from your hand feeds into the whole trying to get cards on board thing. You can go into Raccoon, into a Ginyu, into another battle card, and in that regard, you're really starting to get the flood going. Also, he's a self-awakener, which for those of you who don't know, self-awakening means the act of taking your own life to get you closer to be able to awaken. And because we really need to be on our backside to be able to kind of close out games, we want to make sure that we get there in a timely manner. Then we pivot into the Ginyus, which are easily the most powerful cards in the deck. You get off with the 3-drop Ginyu 20k on play, add up to 1 extra card with Ginyu Force in its special traits from your drop to your hand. Great to get that additional value, especially when we look at the extra cards, because the way that we're going to be playing this deck is a little more of a set up into OTK as opposed to an all-out aggro deck, which this deck can do, but I think it plays out better if you set up a lethal turn as opposed to just kind of going all in because of how specific your leader interaction is with the deck. Then we got the 2-drop Ginyu 20k on play, look at the top 5 cards to top your deck, then reveal up to 1 non-Ginyu card with Ginyu Force and special traits and add it to your hand, place the rest at the bottom of your deck. It's a little suspect as to why this is a 0 combo card, but it's still a 2-drop that top deck searches for another Ginyu Force, so we kind of have to run it. He's a 20k, so he's a good statted body, can't complain too much there. And then finally we have the last 2-drop Ginyu, and I have to say this is the coldest SPR in the entire set. I'm not even a big Ginyu stan myself, but this is by far the coolest looking card. The art is it's so good, and the card effect's incredibly powerful as well. 2-drop a 20k on play. If you have 3 or more battle cards with Frieza's army and special traits, switch up to 2 your energy to active mode, then you can't play Ginyu for the turn. So be mindful, you can't play any other Ginyus. Play those first if you're going to play into this Ginyu. And the fact that it goes at Frieza's army means it gives you a little flexibility. You're not just reliant on all of these cards, but you're reliant on the other Frieza's army cards, which we will be including. Nice to know that those are included as well. But if we look at these stat lines, 20k everywhere, right? Jice is a 20k. The only one that's not as Guldo is a 5k, but he's more of a utility piece than an actual attacker. And this is where the big silver bullet against this deck kind of rears its head, and it's something we really need to mitigate for because it's probably going to be a heavily played card in the game. And we're talking specifically about Frost, the first floodgate in the game and one that completely shuts down this strategy. It's a 3-cost 20k permanent. Your opponent's battle cards with 20k power or less can't attack. This is really tough because almost everything in yellow is a 20k. Sure, you've got the vanillas and you've got some of the boss monsters that get out of that range, but specific to the Ginyu archetype, this just hoses it because your red opponent can play this and now like 80% of your deck can't attack, which is really tough. It can't attack battle cards. It can't attack attack the leader card. It's a really tough ability to have to play around, especially since it's in red. And I think red U7 is going to be a powerful deck. And I think they're going to use this card because there's no reason not to. It protects your cards. It means that your opponent's going to play around it. It slows them down. It's an incredibly powerful card that I think is going to be teched a lot. So we need a game plan to deal with it. While I do think green is going to be probably the most represented color in the game, red is a Goku color. It's a Universe 7 color. And it's a really strong archetype. And in that regard, I think it's going to see enough play. And unfortunately, the deck can't afford to just have an auto lose matchup. The red matchup is always going to be tough, not only because they got Frost to lock you out, but because they have board clears and board removal. And in general, it's just a color that's going to be really hard. The very least, we want to make sure we have a certain level of game against it. In that regards, we bring our tools in to be able to put it in rest mode and hopefully deal with it. So we run the Frieza. Honestly, great flexibility in general. It's a powerful card. It's a 10k combo. It can remove something. It can get rid of a blocker. It does a lot. So it's a phenomenal card. We'd probably run it regardless. Crusher Ball. It replaces itself and it takes any card, puts it in rest mode. Super important to get rid of blockers, but also be able to rest Frost so that maybe we can attack into it. Death Ball. Our opponent attacks into us and they have a Frost. Now on their turn, we're able to protect ourselves as well as put Frost in rest mode. And now hopefully we can attack into it. But finally, Golden Death Beam. I don't want to run too many of these, but I think because of the threat of Frost and being able to save for 1 energy, I just kind of get rid of it. Don't have to worry about attacking into it, putting resources into it. Maybe you protect it with a super combo, and now I'm just looking at my board and realize I can't do anything anymore. It is one of those things where I think it's just a necessary evil because of the weaknesses of this deck. So we include a pair just to be able to hopefully be able to deal with it. And if not, we can charge them. And it runs a little bit of utility as just general removal for cards that we don't want to deal with on board. Then to round out the package, because we are kind of limited in the Ginyus that we can run, I do think that having a little bit more flexibility in our mid-range is important. So we're running the 2-drop Frieza, this also being a Self-Awakener. I feel iffy for most decks not running at least 8 Self-Awakeners here means you're guaranteed to see it. It can help you clean up with board. It can get rid of blockers. It can do quite a bit in that regard. I think this card is incredibly powerful, great utility, and good for managing the early game. And sometimes we don't close out with the OTK, and that's okay as well, depending on how our opponents were able to defend. So I do like the 5-drop Frieza to give that double strike threat. Also, the when attacking provides you an ability to be able to deal with other boss monsters in which yellow can't really. You can't really remove cards for the most part if they're too big in yellow. So the ability to lock them out with a big beefy card is very helpful on that front as well. Now at the beginning of the video, I did say that we're going to primarily look to set up the OTK. I don't necessarily think the best way to play this deck is to always just slam every Ginyu Force, attack. I think there are some strategies that will do well against. I think against green, you can probably get away with doing that kind of thing. But in general, I think the best bet you have is to get your pokes in, get your opponent into a range where they can be taken out, and then you go for the OTK. So I'm a big believer in setup cards. And in that regard, we look at the Ginyu extras, which really feed into that. We want to be able to discard dead cards out of our hand, but also still have combo power so we can attack into the 30Ks and force our opponent to have to take life. In that regard, now you see the power of the Ginyu Force is incredibly good in that front. It's a 1 cost. If you have 2 or more battle cards with Ginyu Force in their special traits, draw 2 cards. Mind you, this doesn't count the leader. The leader is in the leader area, so you do need 2 specific battle cards. But turn 1, you play a Jais. Turn 2, you play a Ginyu. And then in that regard, turn 3, you play a Raccoon. Now your board's set up, but you're not ready to be able to go in on turn 4. You play this card, you draw a card. You play another one, you draw a card. Maybe you play the Ginyu to be able to get the extra card back so that you have it back in your hand after that. So you're really setting up your hand to be able to close out the turn after, maybe to get a couple of more defenses. I could see people cutting it because they want to stay lower to the ground and not waste turns doing this, but I think there's so much utility in being able to find pieces, but also being able to set up for the OTK. And setup we really do because with the Bonds of the Ginyu Force, we can attack for major swings and is in contention for one of the most powerful battle extra cards in the game. It has some setup, but if it's set up correctly, this could add 25, 30, 35k combo power to your attack, which is absolutely massive. For 1 cost, activate battle, choose your leader up to 1 of your battle cards, and it gets 10k power for the battle. Pretty middling. But then that battle card gets 5k power for the battle for each card with Ginyu Force and its special traits among your leader and battle cards. So off rip, it's a 15k. That's nice. It kind of lines itself up with all the other battle tricks for the most part. And then it's a 20k for the next battle card, 25k. Now we're at giant meteor status. And realistically, when you're going for the OTK, you're probably gonna have 3 to 4 battle cards on the board instead. So potentially this could be swinging for like 30k, which is huge, especially when you combine the fact that you're gonna be attacking 8 times that turn, depending on what your board setup is looking like, which can be incredibly powerful. That's not to say there's not considerations deck. I will admit a lot of this is theory. It's not fully tested out, but based on how I picture the game playing out, this is really where I think the build leans into. But if you have any other card considerations, I think you can include any of these and have a good warranty, right? So having some non-20k battle cards that can attack and apply pressure into your opponent, pretty important in a world where red U7 is going to see some play. So if you want to play Cooler as just a great attacker slash blocker on that front, I get it. I'm not playing the 1-drop Ginyu because his utility really only exists in as far as going into the OTK turn. So you play him for 1, He gives you the amount of Ginyus you need. You draw a card and then you use your ability to be able to restand. He draws another card. So now he's finally gone +1. But in my opinion, that's a lot of work. I'm not too sure. I think you could make an argument for it because it's just a cheap play that sets up for having enough bodies on board to make your Ginyu plays, and you can go for it from there. That's great. But I do think Ginyu is better in Frieza, where your opponent needs to actively spend some energy using removal to get rid of it because it's going to be stood up. In that same regard, you could run Sorbays just to have that clean draw. I wouldn't fault that either. But regardless of variation, this is my current build that I would be going into if I were to play Ginyu. And honestly, like I have to reiterate, a lot of this is theory, but I do think it leans into an incredibly consistent OTK deck if played correctly. I'm leaning more to the idea that you're going to poke your opponent, get them down to 4 to 3, something like that in the early game, and then you go in for the turn. I don't think you automatically on turn 3 slam your Ginyu ability, swing with a bunch of 20Ks. I think that unfortunately will lend you to potentially lose out more than you will win, but some strategies will just get there off the back of doing that. So the fact that it's an option is very powerful, and sometimes you just do it because you can get that read on your opponent. But I think leaning into the setup of drawing a ton of cards, having a lot of combo ability to be able to kind of close out the game, especially with Bonds of the Ginyu Force after that, will lean to more consistent games. But nevertheless, I think the deck is a ton of fun. I don't necessarily think it's tier 1, but I think it can position itself to have a really good time. I could be completely wrong. Honestly, when it comes to yellow, it's one of the colors that, as much as I've played the yellow Frieza starter deck, exploring the rest of yellow has definitely been one of the things I've done probably the least. I think you can still have success with this build, so honestly, take it out, have some fun, but I'm open to any criticism. So if you have any, let me know in the comments down below, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.